Should I jump right in?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, great. So my name is Mike Stenta. I'm the lead developer of FarmOS. I've been working with Franklin to help get Pasa member farms set up with FarmOS instances, both for general record keeping, but also for the soil health benchmark study that Franklin's been leading. So Franklin, did you want to talk for a minute about that with these two slides?
Yeah, sure. Um, so as Mike mentioned, at Pasa, we see FarmOS as a really neat tool for any number of farm management problems. But one of the reasons we're particularly excited about it as a tool to help member farms jump in and participate in our research program. And one of the big projects we're now working on is our soil health benchmark study. Which is a on-farm research project where we work with farmers to field soil sampling in a coordinated way, and then link soil health results to farm management records like soil disturbance, crop rotations, and soil amendments. And so that involves over the course of the year taking, good records on when you're planting crops, when you're prepping the soil or using tillage instruments, and what kind of amendments and when you're adding them. And FarmOS can be a really good tool for keeping track of that. And Mike has actually been helping us to develop some new capabilities in FarmOS to make it that much easier to do. You can go to the next slide, Mike. And just some of the things we do with this data is we get benchmark reports back to the participants. Here's a set of graphics that shows for a case study farm. This is a vegetable farm. How many days of living cover it maintained in its fields compared to some pure vegetable farms. Those are the gray dots. And in this case, this farm was a leader in our study in terms of cover cropping and days of living cover. We're also able to look at the tillage intensity and the soil disturbance and show this case study farm relative to their peers. And in this case, this farm was actually tilling quite a bit more than some of their peer farms. And it's these kind of data sets that are helping Pasa drive education in a way that we can help everybody learn from leading farmers that are really pushing the limits on cover cropping or on reduced tillage. And it's all made possible by having good records on the farm, which is, again, why we're excited to work with Mike for making FarmOS more available.
Great. So I'll talk a little bit just briefly about what FarmOS is. This is a pretty short webinar, so we're going to go through just a couple of things. We're going to focus mainly on mapping and also entering your plantings and your crops. I think we've got some members of this is mainly for the Pasa farmers, but we've also, I think, got some members from the Vermont Vegetable and Berry Growers Association with us on the call. So welcome. And this should be general enough for everyone. So yeah, feel free to ask questions in the chat if you have specific ones. I'll try to leave some room for some Q&A at the end here. So I'm just going to briefly introduce FarmOS, what it is, why it is, and what some of the things it can do. And then we'll just jump into a live demo and I'll show you how to do some things. So FarmOS is a web-based application for farm management, planning, and record keeping. And what that means is it's something that you can access through a web browser, meaning you can access it on your phone by going to the address of your FarmOS, or you can access it on your laptop or computer, just like you would a normal web page. So here's what some of our big picture goals are with the project. And just to kind of step back a minute, so you may have already used something like this if you've ever used things like Ag Squared or Farm Logs or Tend, and those are all similar programs. What sets FarmOS apart is that it's an open source project and community. So this is actually being built all in the open, all transparently. Anyone can take part in it and contribute code and features back to the project. And anyone can download it and use it for free too. They can set it up and host it themselves. Through Pasa and through VVBGA, I'm helping to provide hosting to the farms there so that they don't have to worry about running it themselves. All they have to do is log into their FarmOS instance and use it from there. So the big picture goals, we want to be able to collect anything. So it's really meant to be a database for you to store information about your farm. And that can be as granular as you want it to be. So the ability to record activities and observations, inputs and harvests, being able to map your farm and say where things are at any given point in time, being able to pull in weather data and DIY sensor data too. So the ability to kind of set up your own low-cost environmental sensors in the greenhouse or in the field, and have that information pipe into FarmOS. And it should work at any scale. So this is already being used, from large row crop operations all the way down to backyard gardens, because the concepts are really the same. It's just about how you're organizing these things. So, from that, you also need the ability to find and manage those records. So getting them into the system is step one. Getting useful information out is step two. So the ability to search for things, linking them together in certain ways so that you can find them by jumping from one piece to the next. Categorization and flagging, filtering and sorting, and the ability to export data into a spreadsheet so that you can then do further processing on it if you want to outside of that. And from anywhere. So like I said, it's a web application, so it runs on any device with a web browser. We're also working on an offline Android and iOS app that you can use to take simple observations or record logs in the field without an internet connection, and then sync those back to FarmOS when you have a connection. So that's not available yet. We've got a beta version if anyone wants to try it out, but we're also hoping to launch those on the app stores at the beginning of next month, hopefully. So the other big piece here is that you own the data. Like I said before, this is an open source project, so the concept of free software is all about you having the freedom to run this code yourself and to own anything that you put into it, which is not possible with a lot of systems that are out there right now. So that's really one of the challenges that we're trying to solve. So by default, everything that you put into FarmOS is private and only you have access to it. It also has fine-grained permission, and there is value in sharing data with others, at different levels. So for example, sharing data with Franklin for the Pasa research, or sharing data with Becky through the VVBGA. We're really hoping to kind of make that an option, but as an opt-in capability. So it's not sharing by default, but we still have the power to do that in the future. And there's a global community building up around this. So it's free and open source, anyone can contribute. We're working on multilingual support, and it can already do metric and imperial units. And it's just a platform. So additional modules and features can be added on a per farm basis. So if you're doing beekeeping, you can turn on the beekeeping module, but if you're not, then you wouldn't. So there's lots of modules available like that already, and more being developed as we move forward. So in FarmOS, there's a couple of main types of records, and it should be pretty intuitive once you wrap your mind around this. But you basically have four main types. You have areas. These are the where on your farm. So these are like your fields, your beds, your greenhouses, anywhere that something might be located. And those are used along with the other records to define movements of things throughout the farm. Assets are the what. So FarmOS is very general. It can be used for tracking your plantings for diversified crop operations or large crop. It can also be used for livestock. So there's an animal asset type. You can also keep track of all of your equipment records. And like I said, beekeeping. There's also modules for mushroom production and maple production, and a couple of others, as well as the sensor module too. So assets are kind of the main things that you're tracking on the farm. And logs are what ties it all together. So logs are the individual events that take place on your farm. So every time you do something on the farm, you can enter that into FarmOS as a log. And those logs can reference assets and areas. So you could say, here's a seeding log, and I seeded this broccoli planting into this area. So then once you're once you've got that data in the system, you can kind of get to it from multiple places, and I'll show that in a second. The last one is people. So each worker on your farm can have a separate user login, so they can have tasks assigned to them and check those off when they're done. And so it can be organized that way. We're also working on adding things like time tracking and those kind of features. So this kind of illustrates a simple example of how these records get linked together inside the system. It really creates a web of associations. So, up here we've got field A, and field A might have a planting in it called 2018 corn. And associated with that planting, you might also have a seeding log for when that was seeded. And you might have an input log that tells when you added some compost or something. And that compost input can be associated with both the planting and the field, so that in the future, if you want to come back and see, well, what did I add to my corn? You click there and then you'll see that input log. Or if you want to say, what did I add to my field? You click on the field and it'll show you the same thing. Similarly, we have soil test logs and others that I'll show you in a minute. So if you can imagine, over time, you really develop this rich data set within FarmOS of all the things that you've done and all the things that you've managed. And you can kind of archive things so that they're saved in the background and you can find them again, but they're not really cluttering your day-to-day stuff. So over time, you really develop this nice database that you can look back on. And it's just so useful to be able to say, like, when did I seed this? Or what did I put into that field last year? Because, I have a pretty good memory, I feel like, but you go back 1, 2, 3 years and it gets fuzzy really quickly. So for more general information, you can go to FarmOS.org. There's documentation there with a user guide. So there's lots of information there that you can dig deeper into. And there's ways to join the community too. So if you're going to be using FarmOS, that's the best way. That's the first step. Then from there, if you have ideas, feature requests, or if you find bugs, you can report those so that we can get them fixed. And planning. So if you're really into it, we have a chat room. We also have a monthly call where farmers just kind of get together and throw around ideas for how to make a cool web application. We also accept sponsorship, and help with documentation is always great. So if you really get into this and you want to help others learn it, we could really use some more videos and documentation of that kind. And if you're a developer, hop in. We've got plenty of work we want to do. So patches are always welcome. So I mentioned this at the beginning, and right now Pasa is offering FarmOS for free to Pasa members. You can sign up through this link here. It's pasafarming.org/soil-institute/farm-based research/FarmOS. And you might be able to get there from the homepage too, if that's easier. If you're not a Pasa Farm member, you can also use farmear.com, which is a hosting service that I provide. So this is just a service that I use to help farmers get up and running without hosting it themselves. The alternative is you can just set it up and host it yourself, but it does require a web server and some experience with kind of running a website in that way. So let's jump into the live demo. Is there anything you wanted to add before I do that, Franklin?
No, that sounds great, Mike. Just a reminder to folks that they can chat in questions at any time, and we will also have time at the end of this for additional questions.
Okay, great. So I'm just going to jump into this FarmOS instance that Franklin and I actually set this up for the Pasa conference. So a lot of the content in here, a lot of the records in here are things that people who attended the Pasa conference put in themselves. We set up the site and then gave everyone a login to it so that they could play around while we were demonstrating it. So I can show you a little bit of what this looks like, and then we can kind of jump in and start doing some stuff. So if you see up at the top here, you've got the 4 main record types that I mentioned before: areas, assets, logs, and people. So if I click on areas, this will bring us to a map on the left that shows our areas. We can zoom in on that and click on individual areas. And this will tell us, what the acreage of that area is, but it'll also give us some quick links to records that are linked to that area. So this one has an observation. And if I click on that, this will bring me to the list of observations in that field. And then I can see this observation here, which was just a test. So I'll come back to observations when I get to logs. But the areas in your farm can be arranged hierarchically, and you can have fields, you can have beds, buildings, greenhouses. So it really just kind of creates a vocabulary of places on your farm that you can then reference later on. There's also some more advanced features for importing areas in bulk, and also a bed generator tool to make it easier to generate a lot of beds all in one go, because it can be tedious to draw them all out. So you can kind of see what that looks like here. This one has had the bed generator used on it to generate a bunch of beds. So now I can click on each one and see, bed 19, bed 27, bed 20, bed 33. And each one of those can have separate records associated with it. So again, it's kind of up to you how granular you want to get with this. We try to make it so that you can really represent just about any kind of farm down to a very specific level. But it's up to you how deep you want to go. So assets, like I said before, are the things. So you've got your plantings, your animals, equipment. If you have other add-on modules enabled, this list would grow. So you might see sensors here, or bee colonies, things like that. So just to show you, we'll jump over to plantings. So this is what your plantings list might look like. And this was just a demo site, so there's not much here. But here's two examples at top, the winter lacinato kale in field B and the winter broccoli in field C. So each one of these is a record in itself. So I can click into this. And then this shows me more information about that specific planting. So it tells me that the crop or variety is lacinato kale. The season it's part of this season, 2018-2019 winter. And then down here, I can see logs that are associated with that. So here's a seeding log. This is when I seeded it, and it says I did five plug trays of that. And also transplantings. So I did March 18th, I did a seeding, and May 18th, I did a transplanting of 100 row feet. And the units are pretty free form, so you can put in whatever you use. As long as you're kind of consistent internally, that'll work for you, I think. So we'll create one of these in a minute, but I just want to go through the top level stuff again. So logs, again, are the events that take place on the farm. So anytime you're doing something, you enter a log. And this is kind of how you do most of your record keeping. The assets and areas are sort of organizational elements of that. And logs are really what you'll be adding from day to day. So logs can be very general. They can be things like activities or observations, or they can be more specific, like harvests and inputs. Some logs are specific to a type of asset, like seedings and transplantings are specific to planting assets. And others don't require any assets at all. So like a soil test, you can enter there and link it to an area. And then people, so I'll jump over to the people tab and just show you what that looks like. So you can enter each person on your farm here, and you can give them different roles. So there's 3 roles that come with FarmOS. There's farm manager, farm worker, and farm viewer. This also has an extra one because it's a hosted account. But the manager and worker have pretty much the same capabilities. They can add and edit records. Managers have a little bit more control over the configuration. Viewers are an interesting role because that gives you the ability to say, here, you can log into my FarmOS site and you can see everything that's going on, but you can't do anything. You can't change anything or add anything or delete anything. So it's a great way to give people access to your FarmOS who might, want to see what's going on for whatever reason. And that could be, your customers, or it could be an organic certification agent. There's a lot of potential use cases for that.
Mike, we have a question from David, who's asking, can you create more roles, or is the system designed around just those 3 roles?
Yeah, so great question. So this whole system is actually built on top of another system called Drupal. And Drupal has a very robust and fine-grained access control system that allows you to define roles and what the permissions are on each of those. So within, so if you download this software and set it up yourself, you have full control, and you can add more roles and you know, do some really advanced stuff with it. Inside the hosted system, you don't have that same level of control, just because it's a little bit, it needs to be kind of kept a little bit more standardized so that it's easier to automatically upgrade them. That's kind of the main consideration when you're making changes to FarmOS, is that you don't want to do something that will conflict with a future version potentially. So the answer is yes. If you're hosting it yourself, you can do that. So I think what I'll do is I'll just do a real quick demo where I'll walk through, I'll create an area, and then I'll create a planting to show you what that looks like. So to add an area, I'm just going to come back to my home page, and on all pages you'll see these green buttons up top, and these are your buttons for adding records, and they'll change from page to page depending on the context. So I'm going to click Add Area, and I'll just give it a name. So I'll call this one, let's call it Southfield. And then you set an area type. So like I said, there's bed, building, greenhouse, paddock, field, landmark, water, property, or other. So I'll just call this a field. And then down here on the map, you use the buttons on the map to draw out where that field is. So let me zoom in here and pick a spot that I'll map out. We have another YouTube video that goes into all the details on how to use these buttons and how it all works. So I'm not going to go into a ton of detail on that right now. If you want, you can watch that video. But I'll just draw out a polygon around this field here. And then I'll come down here and click Save. And now that area exists in there, so I can see it on my map here. I think I called it Southfield, so if I click on that, we see Southfield. It tells me it's about 0.6 acres. So now, let's say I want to put a planting in that field. The fastest way to do this is to use what's called a quick form. So here's a tab on your dashboard called Quick Forms. And these are for kind of common tasks in FarmOS where you just want to enter data real quickly. So we have a planting quick form for recording a planting. And what this lets you do is create multiple records at the same time. So in order to have a planting, you need a couple of things. You need a planting asset, but you also probably want to have a seeding log and maybe a transplanting log. And maybe you even want to put in your harvest log in advance so you know kind of when you want to start harvesting that. So that's what you can do with this quick form. So to do that, the first thing you do is you define what your season is. So it'll pre-populate with what you had before. So I'll just leave this at spring 2019. You can optionally put multiple crops or varieties in a single planting, but I'm not going to do that now because that's more for like pasture seeding purposes. For normal diversified crop farms, you're just going to do a single variety. So let's say we're going to plant some broccoli. So as you type, it'll bring up crops that you've already used in the past. So I'll put that in. You could also get more detailed with this. You could say broccoli and then put in a variety name after that. It's kind of up to you. So then down below, we see this add seeding field. I'm going to uncheck that just to kind of give you the overview here. So you have 3 options here. You can add a seeding, add a transplanting, and add a harvest. So this is where we're kind of creating those other records at the same time. And while we're doing this, it's automatically generating a name for your planting down here. So right now, it's just spring 19 broccoli. But if we add a seeding, we can say, okay, we're going to seed it. Let's seed it today, March 8th. And we're going to seed this into a greenhouse first. So I'm going to say greenhouse 1. And you can optionally put in quantity. So you can say how many flats you did. I'll leave that alone for now. And whether or not it's done. So I'm going to mark this as completed. I'm going to say, yep, that's done. But I'm going to want to transplant this. So let's just say I'm going to do this next month, April 8th. And I'm going to transplant this into the field that we just made. So I'll select Southfield. And this one's not done yet, so I'm going to leave that unchecked. And I'm also going to not add a harvest yet, because I don't really know exactly when it'll be ready, so I'll add that harvest record later on. So now you can see the planting name also added South Field broccoli, because it knows that in the future I'm going to be transplanting it into South Field. So if I hadn't added transplanting here, that wouldn't be there. And you can customize this if you want, if you don't like that convention. So then I just click Create Planting. And notice what it did here. It actually created three things. It created a planting, which is an asset. And then it created two logs, my seeding log and my transplanting log. So now if I click on the planting, we've got our broccoli planting here, and we've got our two seeding logs, or our seeding and our transplanting logs. So it says on March 8th, I seeded this in the greenhouse. And notice over here, it says that this is done. It's checked off as done. But under my transplantings, that one is not done yet. So that one is on my to-do list, in other words. So now I've got this, this planting in here. And again, this is under Assets, Plantings. So if I come up here and click Assets, Plantings, I'll now see my Spring 19 Southfield broccoli right there. So I can get to that through multiple paths. I can also get to those logs separately too. So if I just wanted to see like all my seeding logs, both done and not done, I could come and do logs seedings. And let's see, there it is right here. Seed Spring 19 Southfield broccoli, and that one's already done. So you can imagine as you're going through this, you could be checking these things off. So to demonstrate that, if I come here and say, okay, oops, I did seed that back on March 18th, I just forgot to check it off. I can come in here, click it, and then click done. And then that will mark that log as done. So now that one is checked off. So as you're going through, you kind of develop this archive of completed activities. And you also have a list of activities that haven't been completed. From there, you can decide if maybe I'm not going to do this, so I'm just going to delete that one. Or, oh, I missed the date, but what I'll do instead is I'll reschedule it. So you can just check that off and click reschedule. And then, okay, I'm going to do that. Maybe I'll do that April 8th. So that just bumps it up to April 8th so that you're ready to go. Now, what's nice about having these logs in here is then if we go back to our dashboard, we actually have all of those logs listed under your upcoming tasks. So we'll see, here's the, one of these is the one that I just rescheduled. And they're here right on the dashboard. So I know that, okay, well, if today was April 8th, I can be like, okay, great, it's time to seed the broccoli. So I'll go in and do it, and then I'll just come in here and click done. And then that kind of gets archived, but I can still always get back to it through the main logs list. Similarly, it will also show you late tasks down below. So these are logs that are not done, but have a date that has gone past. So this was back in February. So this is another great case where you might want to use the reschedule. So you can come here and say reschedule this. And I'll reschedule that to April. And there, I think, is that the one? I think that's the one. So yeah, there you have it. That's kind of the quick way to add plantings. So if you can imagine, you can get pretty speedy at adding these things because it does auto-populate some of that stuff and gives you these kind of drop downs to find things. What FarmOS doesn't do right now is provide a calculator to tell you when you should be planting things. So I still think there is value in having a spreadsheet for that kind of thing, or whatever tool you might be using to determine when you're going to be doing stuff like that. But then once you actually do it, you can put it into FarmOS so that it's stored as an archive. Because that's one thing a spreadsheet doesn't necessarily do, is keep track of what you did or didn't do. I mean, you could add a column for that, but spreadsheets are great. I'm a huge fan of spreadsheets. I've used them a lot, but they do, you do run up against limits, and that's ultimately why we started developing this system. And in the future, we'd really like to develop a crop planning wizard within FarmOS as well as an add-on module that provides those kind of calculators. So that's kind of on the horizon as well. It's a little bit after 1 now. Franklin, what do you think? Is there anything else I should cover now, or should we just start answering some questions?
I think that sounds great, Mike. Why don't we open it up for questions?
Great.
So again, there's a chat box at the bottom of your screen, little bubble. You can open that up and type a message to everyone, or to Mike or myself, and we'll see the question.
Yeah, or even if there's just something you want to see in the system, like soil tests or sensor stuff. You know, there's a lot we could show, and I think we said this was going to go until 1 too, so maybe we won't spend too much time, but
sure. So a couple ones that just popped up.
Great.
Well, first, just someone saying thanks. This was excellent. Looking forward to trying it.
Great.
And then we have first from Jim, a question about add-ins modules available for orchards. And then Russell.
Okay. Yep.
Russell asks, is there a form for fertilizer application?
Great questions. Great questions. So the fertilizer application, let me just mention that one really quick, because this is one of the quick forms that Pasa helped to support the development of. So just like the planting quick form, we have this soil amendment quick form, which is really meant to be used for any kind of amendment to soils. But what this does in the background is essentially just to create an input log. So there's different kinds of fertilizings, right? There's ones that are to the soil, and then you might be doing other things to your starts in a greenhouse, which isn't necessarily a soil amendment, but it's kind of similar. All of those kind of things can be entered as input logs. So what the soil amendment quick form does is give you some extra fields on here to help you calculate, how much you've put in and that kind of stuff. So you can enter in information, and a lot of the information on here is stuff that we want to collect for the soil health benchmark study to get a sense of the amendments going into soils. But you can figure out how big the areas are, what the nutrient analysis is, where you got the input from, application information, and total volume and rate and that kind of stuff. So this is a great quick form for that kind of stuff, and you can use input logs more generally for other types. Then with regard to orchards, there are people who are already using FarmOS for orchard management, and essentially they just use the normal plantings feature here. So what you could do is just come in here and say add a planting, and then you could add, if you're setting up a new orchard and you're planting trees for the first time, what you could do is add transplanting logs to say that I'm planting these trees in this location. Or if you're coming into an orchard that already exists, you don't need a seeding or a transplanting log. You just have your asset, and then you start recording activities against that asset. In many ways, FarmOS is kind of like a bookkeeping system. It's kind of like a ledger where your accounts are your assets. So you have your assets, and then you have your activities and transactions on those assets. So when you're putting in inputs or harvests, those are kind of like inputs and outputs from those assets, from those records. We've talked about some more specific features around orchard management too, so I'd love to see something like that develop, but as is, you can already do quite a bit with what we have.
Great. And so Scott asks about a recording of this. Yes, we are recording it. I'll have it up on the Pasa website soon, and I'll also be sending a follow-up email to you all with the recording, as well as a quick evaluation and information about how to get set up with a Pasa FarmOS account. Justin asked, can you set up FarmOS to give him alerts before a planned task?
Ah, great question. So no, not yet. We don't have alerts for tasks yet. We do have some basic alerting in the sensor module so that if you've got a greenhouse that gets too hot, it can send you an alert. But that's not connected to the logs exactly. But what two other developers are working on right now is in the native app, so the Android or iPhone app, they're starting to work on being able to pull in your to-do list for the day, and then using that to create notifications internally. So I don't think that that'll be available immediately once those are in the App Store, but that's kind of on the horizon too. So I think that'll be a good way to do it, because then the alert will come natively through your phone rather than through an email or something like that.
Yeah. Tina asks, can you print out or download a spreadsheet of the information you entered?
Yeah, so all the lists in FarmOS have a CSV download on the bottom, and that works pretty well for most things. It isn't perfect. It won't have everything, mainly just because a lot of the records in FarmOS are more than two-dimensional. A spreadsheet really only has columns and rows, but within a log in FarmOS, you might have references to multiple assets or multiple quantity measurements. So it is somewhat limited to use the CSV export, but it's good for simple things. We also have an API. This is more advanced, obviously, but there's an API that you can use to access just about everything if you know some programming and can write a script to pull stuff out. We have documentation about that too on FarmOS.org.
And then, so Bill asks, when you're using it and you get stuck, is there someone or somewhere to turn?
Yeah, that's great. Another great question. So we've got, let me open up FarmOS.org. I would say just remember FarmOS.org for most questions. We have a chat room. So if you want to jump in, I'm usually in there, and there's other people in there who can answer simple questions. We also have the issue queues where you can post bug reports or feature requests or questions. So you can find links to a lot of that stuff on FarmOS.org.
Great. And then Russell asks, could we see the sensor info?
Yeah, so let me just pull up one demo site here. This is a research farm up in Maine called Wolfsneck Farm. And we've got a sensor. We've got a couple of sensors set up there, but one of them I'll show you here. So notice on here under their farm, they've got sensors under their assets too. So they can manage sensors just like they manage their animals or equipment. And we've got a bunch in here that were mostly tests, but I think it's this one here. Okay, yeah, so this one is, you can see where this is deployed. It's deployed to a shed out in the middle of a field. And what it's measuring is humidity and temperature, as well as the battery that it's hooked up to. So we've got it set up on a solar charger. So it's also monitoring its own power source, which is kind of neat, because then we can open this up on a phone and just check in to make sure it's looking good. But you can also see the raw data that's coming in down here. So you can export this too. There's on FarmOS.org, there's some good, let's see if I can get to this guide, /assets/sensors. This page here has a lot of information about how that works, and also some people showing how they've set up their own sensors and pushed to FarmOS. So there's different ways to do this. A lot of people are using Raspberry Pis, which are a cheap computer. It's under $50 that you hook a little temperature sensor up to and just leave this out in your field. I've actually got like 5 of these myself, measuring different things around my property. So yeah, there's some good documentation here. It does require a little bit of interest in kind of hacking things together, but it can be pretty fun if you're into that.
Great. And then Elizabeth asks about the phone apps, are those available now, or when will they be becoming available?
Yeah. So right now we've got working code that's able to do basic offline observations and logging. Um, if you have an Android phone, you can actually download it already from here. We're using this service called PhoneGap Build to download to build it. So you can actually download an Android APK file right here and install that on your phone. You have to tell, if you have an Android, you have to tell your phone that you're okay with installing something that didn't come from the store. So it's like untrusted in that way. Um, for Apple, you can't do that. They don't allow you to install random apps. It has to come through the store. But we've got a test flight, which is the first step to deploying an Apple App Store. So if you're interested in beta testing this before it comes out on the App Store, just somehow get your email address to me, and we can add you to the test flight system, and that'll give you the ability to download it on your iPhone. But yeah, we're hoping to. Jamie and Alex are working on this, working hard on it right now, and they're hoping that they'll be able to launch on both app stores April 1st, if possible. So we'll see how that goes. And I say App Store, but it will be a free app. That's just what it's called, the App Store.
Great. And then a couple more on the queue here. Sherry asks, can you create your own shortcut templates, I guess quick forms, for entering info that you do frequently?
Yeah, that's a good question. So not really, no, not without doing some programming yourself. So these quick forms that are in here are all kind of defined in modules that involve some coding. We have thought about trying to build some sort of flexible form builder, but that's kind of a bigger task. I would love to see that kind of come together, though, eventually. In the meantime, if you have ideas for quick forms like this, send us, put in a feature request, because we love to see what would be useful.
Yeah, I guess just on that note, Mike, you've been mentioning kind of feature requests and things that you and colleagues are working on. I guess I would just point out that a lot of that stuff seems to come together pretty quickly.
Yeah,
so this whole thing is pretty dynamic and improving every day.
Yeah, thanks, Franklin. It's true. The momentum has been building a lot. Yeah, I've been working on this for about 5 years now, and the first couple of years of that was really just trying to lay a strong groundwork so that we could build momentum. But I think that's really starting to pay off. Things are happening fast now.
Yeah, great. And then one more here from Chuck. What types of farm field delineation formats can be imported?
Yeah, so we can do, right now we have a KML importer. So if you have KML files, that's the easiest. We can also, there's a couple of ways to do it, but the easiest is with KML. If you can get it into well-known text, that's another option that's relatively easy. So yeah, there's other options. They're just a little trickier. But some of that,
Great.
A lot of that information is right here on FarmOS.org also under User Guide, Mapping Your Farm. So this shows how to import a KML file, for example.
Okay, well that looks to be it on questions. Like I mentioned, I will shortly send out an email to you all with the recording, as well as a reminder about how to take advantage of the Pasa offer to set up your own FarmOS account. Mike is, I know, really interested in continuing to interact. The monthly FarmOS calls are a great way to share ideas or to get some more support. And there are all those other resources, additional videos and so forth on FarmOS.org.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that too, that next Wednesday is the next monthly call. If anyone here is interested, you can find that link on FarmOS.org.
Great. Yeah, thanks very much, Mike. This is really neat stuff, and I hope everybody that called in today gives it a try.
Great, my pleasure. Thanks.
Okay. Well, thank you, everyone. Have a good afternoon.
Thanks, Franklin.